Chapter 30. Epilogue. Then, the boy went on to be the leader of his village and made everyone happy. And so, they all lived happily ever after. The end. A round of applause and shouts flooded the surroundings. Everyone in the room was excited that the story found such a happy ending. The teacher looked to all of the students and smiled. It wasn't every day that the class would raise so much ruckus for a story. Her eyes landed on a kid with shaggy brown hair who raised his hand, to which the woman nodded to him. Yes, Asahi? So, did they get married? All of the other students in the class echoed his response as they agreed on the topic. Surprisingly enough, these students were very curious about the story. Normally, when she would tell stories, the kids usually got bored or decided that they wanted to play something else. It would always make her sigh wearily when they did that, but she knew that growing kids obviously wanted to explore more than sit in a chair. Yes, they did get married. The woman smiled to them softly. They were married for many years and are still married today. Many yous were made as they looked on in curiosity. A girl raised her hand expectantly. Mrs. Uzumaki, I have a question. Yes? Go ahead, the woman said as she closed the book, revealing a woman who didn't look a day over 30 years old. Her eyes, a deepened orange hue that showed warmth. Her blue hair, long and silky, ran to the middle of her back. Her blue eyeshadow was still ever present, but the smile that she had never left her face. Is this story really true? The girl asked, surprising Conan. Of course, it's true, Conan said with a small smile. I've witnessed it with my own eyes. You were there? Another boy asked. Yes, I was there, Conan said confidently. If I wasn't there, then none of it would have happened. A knocking rapped against the classroom door, breaking everyone from their concentration. The kids didn't know what was happening, but the teacher smiled in expectance. I wonder who that could be. She walked over to the door and opened it wide, revealing a taller man with white robes walking into the classroom. His stature held confidence and his smile crept from underneath his large hat. Lord Hokage. All of the kids shouted as he walked into the room. Conan closed the door behind her as she walked beside him. All of the kids held themselves seriously, but excitedly from the village leader that showed up in front of their eyes. Hey, kids. The man said as he lifted his head, revealing bright blue eyes and blonde hair that was cut short enough to keep out of his eyes. As you all may have guessed, I'm the 6th Hokage, Naruto Uzumaki. Everyone awed at the man in front of them. It wasn't often that they get to see the leader of the village come into their classroom. Conan walked beside him and smiled as she looked into his direction. Lord Hokage, for what do we owe this pleasant visit? She already knew, but she had to keep up the act for the kids in front of her. The kids were around 8 years old, so they weren't babies, but they also weren't teenagers either. Lucky enough for them, they were on a small break that day and it allowed them to finish the story that they were reading for the past few days. Naruto smirked as he looked to all of the children. I wanted to see all of the kids. I'd like to tell them a few things. He lifted one finger. Firstly, I wanted to tell everyone here that I'm proud of each and every single one of you. Your dedication to your classes is what will propel you forward in life and help you achieve greater things. Naruto's smile widened as he looked at them all. A boy with blonde hair who was a little further back in the class watched him studiously before the Hokage looked up to him and smiled. The boy turned his eyesight away, pretending he had better things to do. Naruto continued with his next finger raised. Secondly, I'd like to mention that this class has received the best grades of the entire school, and I wanted to congratulate you all for working hard. It's amazing that there are so many intelligent children in this class. Lord Hokage, is Mrs. Uzumaki your wife? A girl asked the Hokage curiously. Naruto and Conan looked at each other before he smiled back at the little girl. Why yes, she is. He stated proudly, while wrapping his arm around her waist. She's the best person that I've ever met. So, does that mean that the story she was telling us about was about you? Naruto looked at Conan who only smiled at him with closed eyes. Naruto began to scratch his cheek in slight embarrassment. Yes, that story is about us. I didn't think that you guys would be interested in our story. Naruto leaned over to Conan while covering his mouth. Hey, I thought that you weren't going to read that story anymore. Conan giggled lightly as she spoke. Well, I couldn't help it. Especially after we had nothing better to do, since all of these kids are so smart. They finished everything relatively quickly, so I had to find something else for us to work on. Naruto groaned, but went with the story nonetheless. He was always slightly embarrassed at the story about them. It didn't help that sometimes the story got very personal to him. He learned over the years to let it go, but it still held some strange feelings. It got him thinking about everything that occurred over the past and everything that has happened since the Fourth Shinobi War happened. A small smile crept upon his lips before he shook his head and continued, "Anyway, I wanted to go on and mention that since this class has been so productive, that you are all given free passes to the brand new Leaf World amusement park that will open next week during National Peace Day." All of the class cheered as he grinned brightly at them. "Not only that, but all of your attractions and rides will be free, and you can even bring your family along." All of the kids jumped up in excitement and ran to hug the Hokage, who suddenly felt bombarded by a bunch of hands that grappled him. He maintained his balance before chuckling to them all. Conan laughed as he watched all of the children hold on to him and thank him repeatedly. Conan, a little help here?" Naruto said nervously. He was surprised at the sudden amount, but he couldn't help but think it was a bit too much. He looked up and noticed the blonde-haired boy still sitting in his same place. He never moved. His smile faltered before he chuckled nervously and looked back down at the children below him. "Okay, children. That's enough for the Hokage," she said as she helped detach the children who surrounded him. Their audible groans were heard, but they all complied to her demands. A bell rang loudly and surprised everyone before they laughed and rushed towards their seats to grab their things. "Remember on Monday that we will go outside for another demonstration. I expect that you'll all study over the weekend," Conan told the class as they started to leave. "Yes, Mrs. Uzumaki," the class collectively shouted as they all started leaving the door. The class emptied, and the only people left in the room was one student in the Hokage with the teacher. Conan started to grab some of her things from the desk before Naruto softly reached for her shoulder. She turned and saw the soft smile that he gave to her. She smiled as well as they both closed into each other and shared a semi-deep kiss with each other. Once they broke away, Conan was the first to speak. "I'm surprised you made it today." "Well, I couldn't let this opportunity pass me," Naruto said as he grinned at her. "I have a clone working on my duties." Conan bumped her fist against his chest. "You didn't have to do that. You know that I want you to focus on your work. You're the Hokage after all." "I know, Conan," Naruto said nervously. "I've been busy all week and I couldn't miss you guys again. I will see my family, whether they want me to or not. I can't be at work all of the time." Conan sighed as she walked up to him and embraced him. It had been a few days since she's been able to hold him like this. She could hear his heartbeat thump against his chest, and she suddenly sighed in content. Life as a Kage was hard work, but it was amazing how Naruto made things work sometimes. His shadow clone technique was quite useful after all. He wrapped his arms around her and started to rub her back. He knew that it had been a while, so he wanted to come hell or high water. He was determined to make his life easier sometimes. Otherwise, the work would drive him insane. Feeling her against him again made him sigh happily. He missed this. "Come on, Dad. I want to go home now." A boy with blonde hair and blue eyes walked up to them with his book bag and pouted. His 2 whisker marks on each side of his face became more pronounced as he puffed his cheeks out. "Oh," Naruto said as he and Conan released their embrace. "Sorry, Haruto. You're right. Time is a wasting. Your sister should be home by the time we get home." The walkthrough of Konoha was rather peaceful. The villagers and all of the others all smiled at the Hokage as he walked through the village with his family. The looks of all weren't lost to him, but he had to maintain some of his composure for his family and for his reputation for being the Hokage. "That's an interesting look that you have on your face, Naruto," Conan said in a knowing way. "Gah." Naruto was surprised at his wife's sudden statement. "Well, I've gotten a few reprimands recently by the village council and more specifically, Shikamaru. They want me to look more respectable and wanted me to look stronger, but it's hard." Conan was surprised, but she closed her eyes as she spoke. "Naruto, I don't mind if you relax. You're in your home village, and everyone here respects you already. Don't worry about trying to keep appearances." Naruto thought quietly before he sighed. His wife was right after all. "Yeah, I guess you're right." He relaxed some as he continued to walk through the village. His home wasn't that far from the Hokage Tower, but it did give him enough time to relax with the walk to his home. After rounding a corner, they came up to a house that had various flowers that seemed to take over the front yard. He smiled as he looked at them. It wasn't often when he came home with daylight still peeking from the horizon, but he was happy that he did today. There were many different variations of flowers and they lined the fence with vibrant colors. They all walked up to the front door and opened it. There were stifled giggles that came from the living room and Naruto was curious before he shouted, "Hey, Hanan, I'm home." A loud thud was heard before a girl without shoes on came around the corner. She had blue hair that was similar to her mother's hair and tied in an orange ponytail, but had bright blue eyes. 2 whisker marks adorned her cheeks just like her brother. The 12-year-old's eyes lit up as she ran towards the front door and gave him a bone-crushing hug. He smiled brightly as Hanan shouted with joy. He was happy to see her too. "Daddy, you're finally home. I've missed you. Hanan shouted to her dad. She hasn't seen him for a few days, so being able to see him in the flesh was exciting. She couldn't believe that he was actually there. Wait a minute. It is you, right? Of course it's really me. I wouldn't send a clone out here today. I wanted to spend time with my family. I can't do that if it isn't me, right? Hanan smiled sweetly before she buried her face into his coat. No, I guess not. Shortly thereafter, several small pitter-patters echoed down the hall as 8 creatures showed up with excitement. Oh, hey guys. Did you miss me too? Naruto asked the small creatures. They all smiled as they launched towards him with speed and knocking him down. Konan sighed as she walked around the mess that Naruto became on the floor. She wanted to start dinner, since today was a big celebration. He was home, and she wanted to make sure that his day off was a good one. All of the Bijus stared at him expectantly and made noises in excitement. He always thought that they were cute, and they made him laugh as they all tried to lay on him. He smiled genuinely as he looked down to all of them. He thought back on the times when he realized that most of the Biju were gone because Konan used her jutsu to move them to another dimension. He was always sad about that, but he couldn't help but try to think of another way to fix this issue. He couldn't just leave them on the other side of the dimension. He had to figure something out to bring them back. Therefore, he used his creation jutsu, and with chakra remnants of all of the Biju that had given him power, created new Biju to replace the older ones. His smile faltered once he remembered that the originals are still stuck somewhere, but he hoped that these new iterations of the Biju would still be connected to the other ones. Of course, he already knew that B still had his Biju, but Jayuki didn't seem to mind his new miniature clone. Kurama didn't seem to mind that he also had a new clone. He thought of it as something like a son of sorts. That reminds me. Naruto stood up after a moment and walked over to Hanan. I've heard that you released your Biju chakra against someone the other day. That wasn't a nice thing to do. Hanan was starting to sweat, but Daddy, they were talking badly about you. I couldn't let them say all of those things. I know you're not what they say. Naruto sighed as he ran a hand through his hair. He knew that this was going to be a sensitive topic, but he had to get through it. I know Hanan. The thing is, not everyone is going to like me. Regardless of everything that I've done, there will still be people who are against me. That's just life. His eyes glanced down lovingly at his daughter. You'll just have to learn to tune the naysayers out and remember the truth. If you know the truth, then you also know that what they say is wrong. That means, as much as they lie or spew nonsense, they will never be right. Hanan was taken aback by her father's smooth words. He always did seem to know a lot of things. Okay, Daddy. Have you had any troubles with your seal? Naruto asked curiously. Naruto knew that his sealing skills were really bad, but he tried his best to make something that was good enough to contain a Biju. After practicing for a few years, he was able to achieve this level of precision, but he still had a long way to go before he could even consider himself anything but an amateur. Chakra leaked more easily from his seals, and Hanan always had a few problems trying to keep the seal at bay. No, I haven't had any problems with it. I think it's been fine. I've gotten better at containing it, Hanan said as she rubbed her belly. Naruto thought before he went into his head momentarily. Hey, Kurama? Do you think that she will be fine? Is your clone being a disturbance? My clone seems to be okay. He wanted to be with her anyway. I think his trust of her comes from our trust with you, so we aren't trying to cause anything to happen to her. Kurama said thoughtfully. Okay, Kurama. Thanks a lot for your input. I'll still keep a watch on the seal. I need to make sure that he doesn't accidentally get released because of my ineptitude. It looks like I came in at a weird time, a female voice spoke up as he looked behind himself and saw the previous Hokage entering his home. Oh, hey Granny. Naruto said as she closed the door behind her. I'm happy to see you. I'm happy to see you too. It's been a while, she said while grinning. Her hands held onto 2 bags. One seemed to be loaded with bottles of varying sizes, and the other bag held some kind of cooked food. You brought food? Naruto asked curiously. He didn't expect her to bring something like that over to his house. Yes, I heard from your clone that you were going home today, so I came to bring food and celebrate your rest of the day off. Naruto looked towards the other bag that was filled with booze before he pursed his lips. It looks like you're the one that's going to be partying. Nonsense. Sanada shouted as she put the bags on the table. This alcohol is for you and Konan as well. Naruto got nervous as he thought back on the last time that she did that. All he remembered was waking up naked with no blanket on, and Konan, who seemingly escaped from his drunken stupor, was in the living room sleeping with a half-drawn blanket on her. He could only imagine his annoying tendencies when he gets drunk, so he wanted to opt out of this new drunken escapade. I'm going to have a limit tonight, Granny. I have work in the morning. Bah! What a hard ass, Tsunade grunted as she started pulling everything out of her bags. You used to be much more fun. I'm not a little kid anymore, Granny, Naruto said, embarrassed at her attack on his character. I have things that I have to do. I can't rink like that anymore. Well, you're right about that, Tsunade said while looking towards Konan. That reminds me. I'm still amazed at how young Konan looks. For a 47-year-old woman, she doesn't look a day over 30. I'm envious. You don't look any different either, Naruto said with obvious annoyance. You've always looked the same since I first met you. You may be right, but you have to understand that I'm using a jutsu to maintain this young appearance. Konan doesn't even have to do anything, and she still looks the same. That strange power that she received from the Sage of Six Paths on her forehead really does slow her age, doesn't it? I guess so, Naruto said while bringing his hand up to his chin. But even if she looked older, or is the way that she is now, I wouldn't mind either way. Tsunade laughed as she wrapped her arm around his neck and pulled him to her. That's true love, if I've ever heard it. Lady Tsunade, please stop teasing him, Konan said as she walked towards them. Although, that was really sweet, Naruto. She kissed him on the cheek as she walked back towards the kitchen with a small smile on her face. She turned quickly and spoke. Could I trouble you for help, Lady Tsunade? Tsunade was surprised at the sudden interaction before she broke off from Naruto and walked towards the kitchen. I'll go help Konan cook. You relax and enjoy being home. It's not every day that you are home anyway. Thanks, Granny, Naruto said as he got up. He knew that it has been a while since he's been home, so he wanted to make sure that he made the most of it. Naruto was happy. He knew the things were rough in the beginning, but they've gotten easier over the years. His life has changed drastically over the years, from him being a lonely boy to a loving father with a full family. He never knew that his life would turn out this way. His eyes looked down in sadness as he reflected on the deaths of his former comrades, Sakura and Sasuke. He sometimes wished that they were with him again, that they could enjoy this future with him. He teared up slightly as he found the picture of the three of them with their master Kakashi. It had been forever ago since they both passed away, but the memory of their original team lingered in his mind. He could only wish for a moment that things would have turned out better for the both of them. His eyes gazed upon the picture that he kept of his family in the living room. Both he and Konan had wide, genuine smiles on their faces. Their kids were both smiling together with them, but being somewhat unruly. He laughed as he looked at them. Then, his eyes came across his wedding photo. Their regal appearance was truly astounding, but he looked at Konan's face and saw the image of a woman who seemed as if she was walking on air. She looked like an angel. Naruto smiled as he thought on everything. He knew that he made the right choices. He worked hard. He had to. It was his dream to become Hokage. Having Konan by his side was a decision that he never regretted for a moment. Who knew that saving her would make such a difference in his life? Daddy? Naruto, broken from his concentration, looked over to Hanan and only smiled. Yes? Dinner is ready. Naruto grinned wider as he looked towards his family. He saw Tsunade and his son placing plates, bowls, and utensils onto the table. He watched as Konan placed the foods on the table, and he sighed in content. He knew that it wasn't perfect, but he didn't want to change a thing. He knew that at the end of the day, that this would be his favorite moment. He walked over from his place and went to the dinner table. Tsunade roused up herself with booze and began laughing loudly. Konan laughed as she listened to Tsunade's story that she started telling. Hanan and Naruto both were intent on sitting down, and Naruto decided to sit down as well. Naruto laughed as he watched his godmother laugh herself into a fit. He knew that this night was going to be a night to remember. Such were times like these. But little did he know, these happy times would not last forever. End of chapter 30, and end of story. Final author's note for Tlo. Well, here we are. We finally made it to the end of this story. I'm surprised that I actually completed it. It took me forever. It took me a total of 2,528 days to complete this story that should have been done in only a year. I hope you guys are happy with the outcome of the story. So, to answer several questions that I'm sure is on everyone's minds. Konan's age did slow because of the Kaguya power that she obtained. She slowed just enough to grow old together with Naruto. That way, they look the same age. The Biju are stuck in the other dimension because Madara was the 10 Tails form when he got left there. Naruto, therefore, created new Biju with the two symbols on his hands that are identical to their original counterparts, but they are back to their younger selves and have a mind of their own. Hanan is a new Jinchuriki because Kurama's miniature wanted to be with the girl at first sight. Much more different than the way Kurama behaved over the years. Konan keeps her power, and it works in a certain way. If when I continue the last one with a sequel, you will see more in depth on how it works. I already have it planned out. Naruto still has all of the pieces of the Biju inside of him. He just made new Biju with those pieces. they will also grow with time. Naruto is home way more often than he is in canon for the Boruto series. I can't stand how they did my boy Naruto like that and made him a super square. What kind of lame-ass dad never comes home? Yes, there is a sequel in the works, but don't expect it until later. I have to finish blank page first. It's amazing that I've even thought of the sequel, but that's only because the fight between Naruto and Sasuke with Gaijin fueled the flame for the sequel possibility. Not only that, but the time travel arc for Boruto and Sasuke as well got me speculating everything. Ideas have already come to my head and you guys would love the continuation just as much as the first part of this story. Naruto's hair turned back to blonde during the fight with Madara. The reasoning is quite simple for this story. After he gained all of his powers, they pretty much evened everything out. Now his hair is back to his blonde hair, and you don't have to worry about it being orange or red. I was never planning on keeping his hair those colors. I didn't like it either, but it was important that the hair be orange mainly for symbolism in earlier chapters of the story. Yes, the reason why Konan was saved from the Genjutsu that was cast upon her at the beginning of the story with her fight between her and Tobi and Aim was because Naruto went back in time and repaired her mind. His omnipresence helped heal her while he was in the past for a short amount of time. Yes, this was always part of the story. It was my plan to have him go back in time like that. Hainen translated means flower child. I thought it was appropriate given Konan's fondness for flowers. Haruto means sun or sunlight in relation to his hair. Yes, they both have ha at the beginning of their names for consistency and also for what they mean. The infinite Tsukiyomi tree was cut down after they got rid of Madara.
End of chapter 30 and end of story. What are your opinion about this fanfic? Leave opinion in comment.